So it's an interesting subject, near-death experiences we're talking about tonight, and I think it's there, it's in the zeitgeist, and
Hmm.
it's there. I'm in the midst of developing a TV show regarding it because it's out there and it's going to happen, and it's really an interesting subject because many people have them. It's become more and more popular, of course, very much so. I know you had one,
I did have one, but one thing I do want to say about it, which I find fascinating, is that these experiences, these shared experiences, go across every religion, every culture. It doesn't matter.
right?
Everybody can experience or has experiences from different points of view, and yet still come up with the same information. Fascinating to me.
It's really true. And there are common themes, of course, in
Hmm.
NDE, common themes, and there are some that stand out. And there are many, many books that have been written on near-death experiences.
Yeah.
And one was done several years ago. I want to say 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And it was a gentleman came through and authored this book who talked about the darker side of the experience of going to the hellish kind of experience. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too as we go on here. But
Oh, that's
that's
interesting.
very
Wow, I
interesting.
didn't know that one. Well, let's talk about first, what is a near-death experience?
Well, for me, and Kelly,
Mhm.
you might have your own idea about this, but for me, it is, um, hmm, well, from personally experiencing it, leaving the awareness of the physical body, the consciousness, if you will, and being out of it, and being aware that you're almost passing to the other side of life, that the
Yeah.
physical life is almost gone. From my experience, I was, God, how many years ago? How many years? Probably 20 years ago now. But I remember I was very sick. And I went to the restroom had to vomit, and I my head hit the sink. And I went blacked out on the floor, and I guess blood. I was bleeding all day. I was throwing up blood all day because I didn't know this, but I had a Mallory Weiss tear, which is
Oh,
esophagus tear, and my stomach would fill up with blood, and then I'd vomit, and then I'd be fine for another half hour, and that was a whole day of that without me knowing. And I didn't want to go to the emergency room, but then about 8 o'clock at night, I was with my friend Brian at the time, and thought I gotta, I said, Brian, you should come help me. And I went to the restroom then, and they blacked out. And I remember I was out of my body. I was completely out of the body. There was no pain. I was just aware that I'm out of my body. I'm looking down at my body, and I'm like, wow. And there was no time. I was aware there was no time. I was taking every moment of this. There was no time, no linear time. But I knew inside me this was not my time to pass to the spirit world. I just knew that. And immediately I saw in front of me my cousin Patricia, who died of suicide, who
wow.
taught me metaphysics when I was a child. And I hadn't
Wow.
seen her. She completed suicide 30 years before, 40 years before. Interesting.
Wow.
And I would, of all people. And she said telepathically to me, and I remember your personality stays the same. She said to me, "Don't worry, it's going to be over soon." And I said, "Over or over? Can you help me out because I'm in a bad place right here?" And she stays there, and she vanished. And I remember immediately I had this awareness of above me. There was like this, I'm going to say this cord or this ribbon coming out of the top of my head, which fed into like this matrix of this matrix. And I remember that everybody has a cord or a ribbon on top of their head, which it's really interesting. I knew that every thought, word, act, thought,
Yeah.
feeling would have a color to it. And what you did or what you thought created this color and fed into that matrix. And every single person in the world would experience those fractions of what you gave into it. At the end of our life, we look back and see the colors that we left behind or that we bled
Mm,
into that matrix. And that was
wow.
really interesting to me. So we got to be careful. And that made sense to me because you got to be careful of your thoughts, your acts,
Right.
your words. Those are real things. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. And I can't wait to, I guess, teach it, I was thinking. And then immediately of that awareness, I had an awareness of my father in a garden. And I went toward him and I could just say, walk, not walk toward him, it was toward him. And he showed me a rose and he said, "It's not your time. You have to go back." I knew he was 27 years old. I knew he was in a tan suit. And he said, "You've got to go back." And I went into that rose. And all of a sudden I heard Brian, who was next to me, and he said, "James, wake up, wake up, wake up." And I remember I was back in my body. My eyes were opening. I'm like, and I remember the back of my head really hurt. And I heard him say, "Wake up." And I opened my eyes and the words that in my mouth were, "Dying is easy. Living is hard."
Oh my
And then I went to
gosh.
the hospital. I lost 5 pints of blood, and I was there for 2 weeks with an esophageal tear, which they couldn't do
Oh,
anything about, used to heal. And yeah, that was the and it
oh
was
my God.
Thanksgiving time. Thanksgiving time. I remember that because I had a roommate in the hospital room with an 82-year-old man who was senility, and he kept on eating a turkey soup. And he said, "You can't have any. I can't." So I remember that.
Oh
But
my
that was my
God.
experience. And I didn't know anything that would affect me until about a year after that, maybe a year and a half. I was doing these lectures every year in Arizona, this conference. And the leader of the conference, she came up to me and said, I've seen him for many, many years. Your readings have changed this past year. They're very much on a higher level of awareness, or maybe your guides are different. And I thought, wow. And I looked at that, and it's true. There were the messages were much more, we could say, philosophical,
Hmm.
spiritual, a sense of oneness, a sense of more guidance in the messages, more than just evidential. So they did change.
That makes a lot of sense, adding that depth to it
The
when you
depth to it.
actually have that experience. Wow,
Yeah. So it
that's an
was very,
extraordinary experience.
yeah. And you had one as well,
I
yes?
did. So this sounds oddballish, but when I was
Oh,
3 years
Kelly,
old,
we're
for
all
me,
eyeballish. We're all eyeballish. So
when I was 3 years old, I had encephalitis, which is an inflammation of the brain. And so inflammation of the brain was I had a fever of 105, and they took me to the hospital. I was in the hospital for a week, and I went into a coma.
wow.
Now, my mother was a young mother, and I was the only child, and I remember as they took my, like, lifeless body basically into the hospital, and they were putting, like, vinegar on me and water and trying to get me to, anyway, and then I went into a coma. And here's what happened. I actually went through a whoosh of a tunnel. I
Mhm.
don't know how to explain it other than it was black, and then when I got to the opening, which was this light, it was almost like a jello, kind of an odd kind of a thing, and I kind of pushed through, like pushed through, and when I pushed through, there were 2 women there that were my aunts. Now, I don't have aunts. Both my mother and father had no sisters, so I never had an aunt. I didn't even know, I'm only 3, so I wouldn't really know the word aunt, but they both looked at me, and I felt such love coming, and I just wanted to breathe and be with them. I just wanted this to end and just to be with them. And they said to me, "I'm sorry, Kelly. You have to go back." They said, "Your mother will not be able to live her destiny, so you must go back." Because
Wow.
had I died, my mother would have never become the person she was supposed
That's
to
right.
become. And I went back. I remember the whoosh feeling back, and I remember the sadness and the loneliness and the depression. And it was about, from what I understand, I came to, and then I was out of a coma. But it was a 3-day journey of hell for my mom and my dad.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow,
they didn't
Kelly.
expect me to live. But what's interesting is you've heard of Dr. Eben Alexander, who
Oh,
wrote
of
Proof of
course.
Heaven.
Yes, proof of habit. Yes.
So he had meningitis and I had encephalitis, but they're both inflammation of the brain.
Right. Mhm.
And he was a Harvard surgeon, for people who don't know, who had a near death experience. He didn't believe in any of this, never would have ever. He taught at Harvard. He was a surgeon. He never thought this way until he had a meningitis, a bacterial meningitis, and went into a coma. Didn't come out for a long time. I was in a coma for about a week, or no, about 3 days, and I think he was in a coma for a long time. And then his story about his journey was pretty intense. And when he came out of it, he spent time with God. He spent time with the universe. He spent time, and this was a left brain surgeon who never would have ever talked about it. And he said, they're going to make fun of me, but I'm still going to write about it. And he did write about it.
He certainly did, and opened up a lot of minds with that
Opened
book.
up a lot of minds with this experience. Yeah.
Right. He's
Yeah.
still lecturing about it. That's his work has changed to this type of work now, which is,
Isn't that fascinating?
yeah, like Brian Weiss, same thing. He was a Harvard graduate or Yale
Right,
graduate, and changed to past
right.
like that.
So
It's,
fascinating. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
'cause Rebecca,
Rebecca.
something good.
Hi, Rebecca. She said, I either had a near death experience or an OOB, out of body, when I
Experience.
was 5 during a tonsillectomy. Oh, I bet a gas mask was used back then. Remember
Sure,
those? And I
sure.
truly believe I had an overdose of ether. I found myself at the ceiling in the corner of my room looking down on myself. I could see the doctors around me. I felt ageless. It seemed normal to be watching myself. My mind did not feel like that of a child. It felt like a soul. That's so true. And that's, Rebecca, thank you for saying that. I can still remember this experience like it was yesterday. Okay, thank you for saying that. I feel like, and I was a child development major, that was my bachelor's. I understand as a 3-year-old, I wouldn't know the word destiny, but guess what? I knew it. I knew
Sure,
everything, just like she just mentioned. Good,
sure.
thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that.
And out of body experience is very similar, except I would guess it's just a matter of semantics. Near death, is you almost do die, and out of
Mhm.
body experiences, you can have them. You're going to be trained to go out of your body. The Monroe Institute trains people.
Yeah.
Robert Monroe, back in I think it's in the Carolinas, and the Monroe Institute actually teach people about leaving the conscious of the physical body, stepping out, and that then you can have out of
Right.
body experiences. And people do have consciously. We go out of our body all the time, but we're not conscious of it. But people, you can learn
Right.
how to consciously. And near death experiences where you almost are over to the other side of life, that realm.
Right.
There are
And
some,
I think sometimes it's usually though that it's not your time to go.
yeah. So there are some
Mhm.
commonalities that most people talk about, and what you mentioned, one, the tunnel. There's a sense or a feeling of going through a tunnel, being surrounded by a tunnel, and
Mhm.
then many times there are people at the other side of that tunnel, you really relatives or guides or people that you know, and there's no overwhelming. Some people have a sense of this bright light, beautiful light. They can barely describe it. They call it God, or they call it all these different things.
Mhm.
It's this incredible love that they feel drawn to. I've been through that.
Mhm.
There's also many times a sense of a life review can be happening very, very quickly because you're outside of
Yeah.
linear time, that you can have an awareness of things you've done in the past, in the beginning of your life, and how you affected other people to that day. There is a
Yes.
sense sometimes that people have a destiny sense of going back to accomplish, to finish something. Um,
Mhm.
I think sometimes, I wonder sometimes it has to happen in them to do that. They have to have this near experience in order to
Yeah.
accomplish that
That's what
destiny.
I think, James. I think it has some on some level it must.
And,
Yeah.
and many people talk about Jesus. I'm going to see Jesus. Sometimes they
Yeah.
see, and sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, they can have hellish experience. They're darker experiences. I'm not sorry, I don't remember the name of the book, but this gentleman he wrote a book about going to the darker sides. Now, to me, what that says, and I don't know till I pass
Mhm.
over either, but to me, I know that you go to, there are many spaces and places in the realms, right? And
Yeah.
that you tend to go to that space you've created based with your thought, with your mindset. So if there's something within you, whether it's fear based or ignorance or a darkness, or that's whatever that is, and you believe that,
Mhm.
you might experience that. I think that most of us are love beings. I don't believe in evil. I believe in
Right.
love. I don't know what you believe, Sir Kelly, but I believe
Yeah.
in degrees of love, if you will.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's part of the ego, maybe the dark part of that.
That's what I kind of always have thought, James. A little bit
Yeah,
that it was the ego, that there was something that maybe they had done some things that maybe they, wanted to think about or something that, they had guilt
unconsciously,
feelings of.
maybe.
Yeah, yes. Something like
Okay.
that could
So,
have
and
happened.
there's all that sense also of the life certainly changes usually with a near death experience. And I know that I was thinking about this earlier. To me, there are two commonalities of
Okay.
that I have found, that when people pass over, like a mother or a child, I find that many, many times that when someone passes over like a child, it forces the mother and father or whoever partner to go on their spiritual path, to be awakens them to their spiritual
Yeah.
truth. And really, in a way, it's a gift. And
Yeah.
perhaps that was also decided before they came back into the lifetime
Yeah.
within that soul group, before in the
Hmm.
pre-planning of that life, that at this certain age, I'm going to go over first, and it'll force you to go on your spiritual path. I think that's more true than not.
Yeah. I do
You
too.
know?
I absolutely agree with that. I
Yeah,
mean,
and yeah.
I was gonna say, I think there are, certain things that when you've had a near-death experience, that when you come back, as you said, you became more philosophical, you became deeper, you became understanding of maybe patience and tolerance
Patience,
and
much more
forgiveness.
patience. Yeah,
And those are the kind of things that people would learn from some of these experiences, if you have one, and one of them would be to be grateful,
to be grateful for
right?
every moment of life,
For
because
every moment of life.
it's a gift. I mean, it is a gift because you
Mhm.
can't do those things, tangible things on the other side. You can do the physical things here. It's like the building blocks here. It doesn't happen
Yeah.
on the other side. We progress quicker here, believe it or not, than we do in the spiritual realms, because here we really got to go through the grit of it all.
Right, right.
Very
And the other thing is when you're on the other side, oh, well, let's look at this. Roxanne Kenning. I had a near-death experience at 29. My heart stopped. I wanted to stay, and I was told it wasn't my time. I'll never forget the experience, right, Roxanne? Sorry that happened, but you just will never forget the experience.
And had that during a Saturn return, if I could just throw
Yeah,
that,
well, yeah,
which
you're
is a
absolutely
major
right.
spiritual growth time of our lives.
Huge. I got chills when you said that. That would have been a big thing
Big
here.
one.
A big one. I mean, it's a good question. Are these events, these near-death experiences planned?
It's a good question. I
So,
don't know. I don't know.
yeah.
I think some are. I think some I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's hard to say. I mean, some of them could be based upon choices that we make, things that we do during the day that we just certain choices that we made. I don't
Right.
know. It's hard to say.
So, there's a question here from Illusion. How can we be sure that what we see in a near-death experience is what we will see when we die?
Well, it's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, I would just say this. First of all, number one, it teaches you to go inside and understand who you are. Does it make sense to you when you have these experiences? Is it something that would make sense for you to reach out, to have these values, or look back at
Right.
your life and see people in a better way? And if that's it, then when you pass over, you'll have that same experience of living those values, and
Right.
this is who you are. So what you see is what you get. Again, I always tell people, if you want a great experience, you pass out of this body at lifetime, look back and make sure you've had the best time. And do good, because when you
Right.
get to the side, what waits you is the good that you've done.
Well, I'll tell you,
Or
I
bad
saw
that you've
this. It's so
done.
true. I was watching this video, and I'll have to post this. It was one I sent to you earlier. It was so
It was
fascinating.
amazing,
Wasn't it
amazing.
amazing? And I want to thank Karen Glass. Thank you, Karen, for sending that to me because I thought it was phenomenal. But it's about a nurse who was from Wisconsin, I think, and she had a near-death experience. And while she was on the other side, she got to see her life in the future, and she got to see when one day, actually, what they did is they showed her in the past, and there was a person at the supermarket and she didn't have enough money for her children for food. So this nurse gave her money and said, "No, nope, I understand. I was a single mother. Here's some money." And that woman, they showed that woman in the future, and she was helping to raise money and to give money for food to other people. So that's the effect. As you've always said, be in a good mood, that mood translates. Be in a bad mood, that energy goes out.
It's
But
a
they
ripple effect.
showed her the good she had done in her life. And I thought that was my favorite part of that video.
Yeah, it's really true. You want to have a life that you're very proud of, the good things that you do,
Yes.
because that's really who you are. Love is your soul. And
Right.
even now with these hard times in the world, we can't forget who we are. We are. We are love. Whether it's disrupted by, or we take a
Right.
temporary disruption of things because we see how ugly things are out there, maybe to us, we got to still remember who we are, and we are loving beings, and
Right.
we'll never lose that. We'll never
Well,
lose that. So harder it is, make it easier on yourself.
so true. So Nancy Shobe says, I had a near death experience when I was 6 years old. I fell through the ice and nearly drowned.
Wow.
I felt a feminine presence holding me close to the hole of the ice.
Wow.
I felt safe, protected, warm, and unconditionally loved. It was so beautiful.
Oh, it's great, Nancy. And that
Wow.
somehow affected Nancy's life. No doubt about it, 'cause she remembers that experience
Yeah.
right now. So that means that in some level she remembered that going through her life, and
Yeah.
probably that warmth, that compassion stayed with her.
Yeah.
So how do we know that does that experience does just shape our souls, and
Right.
each experience that we go through?
And it
That's
would
somehow
shape, I would think, how you treat others.
yeah,
And also we're talking about fear and about belief systems and God and love. I mean, it would really carry you on. That's a big one. I appreciate you sharing that. And I love the ones that when you're young like that. And isn't it interesting? Their memories are as sharp as a tack. What happens?
innocence.
This happens when they're young.
Kelly, I want to talk, just quickly jump in about the experience of being so left with Jesus and angels.
Mhm.
Remember that there are so many levels of knowing and learning, and I
So
just
true.
keep an open mind to anything, and whatever
Absolutely.
it is. Don't limit your belief system to a religious dogma.
No.
Be open to everything. Pure love, let's just call it. Maybe we don't have the words here in this level, but pure love. We are pure
Yeah.
love. That's what you'll experience. If you give that out, you'll get it back, as the Beatles
Absolutely.
say. What you make is what you
Absolutely. Marie Beauchamp, do we have to actually die to have a near death experience? I felt like I was slipping away when giving birth. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry.
Hi, Marie. Kelly, what do you think?
Well, a near death, the definition is that you've died. But, I don't know, James.
There's
What
no
I mean,
and there's no death,
but
you
there's
see.
no death.
So it's a
That's
level of
true.
consciousness. So
Yeah.
what we talk about is maybe the deeper levels of consciousness here, and awareness. So do you have to be not breathing? No, because a lot of near experience is still breathing, or sometimes you don't breathe.
Hmm.
But I think you can have a near experience and be close to that state and get that, and come back like I did.
Yeah.
There's different levels of it, if you will.
Well,
Um,
this is interesting. Dr. Eben, the one we were talking about, who
Alexander,
wrote, the book after he had gone to the other side, he said, during my coma, my brain wasn't working improperly. it wasn't working at all. So
Interesting.
it's interesting how science will go back and say, well, your brain was still, and he's like, no, I'm a neuroscientist. It was not working.
The
Isn't
brain
that
is tied to
interesting?
the physical. Yeah,
Yeah,
the brain is tied to the physical. The mind is eternal. The mind is control.
exactly.
The brain shuts off. It's an organ. It shuts off at the
Hmm.
physical.
Yeah.
Just like a stroke of insight, the lady who had the stroke, who was also a neuroscientist, and she had a stroke, and she's like, I got to remember what I'm experiencing right now because I do this for a living. I got to remember this. And she was aware of a consciousness that she had. And it was just, she was aware of all the energies in the room, of people coming into the room. I remember one said, I don't want that doctor in this room because he has bad energy, pushed him away with the energy. So it's still alert. And that's the mind working, not a
Yeah.
brain.
Lis-
So interesting.
Listen to
Stroke of
this.
insight.
Elizabeth Glomsky says, my husband had a near death experience. He was in a coma for 2 weeks. They told his family not to expect him to live. The only memory he has of that time was that he was in a prison on death row. And every time they tried to put him to death, something would stop it, like the power would go out in the electric chair. He said this changed his life and helped us meet and marry. So something like that may have put him on the right track. That's a
Wow.
big one.
That's a big one.
Anyway, well, James, I look forward to seeing you
Thanks,
next week with another
yeah.
great topic, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to Both Sides Now and Beyond, featuring spiritual medium and master teacher James Van Praagh and spiritual medium and psychotherapist Kellee White.
That was great. Maybe we changed some lives.
And maybe opened up some minds.
Which way do I turn?
Right. I mean, left.